In the first video that we had for the today's session, we saw academic word list, which gives us a detailed list of words that can be used for academic writing. Now, what about word categories that have to be avoided in academic writing? Let's look at that. We have to avoid categories of words like contractions. What do you mean by contraction? Contraction means how we try to shorten certain words like cannot, is not, does not, will not, etc. are contracted or shortened to can't, isn't, doesn't, won't, etc. using apostrophes. This should be avoided in academic writing. So please check your review, whatever you have written. If you have used any of such contractions, please correct those. Use the proper words. No contractions in formal or academic writing. Now, second category to be avoided is informal verbs or phrasal verbs. So we know in order to in place of certain words we use phrasal verbs, like instead of saying go continue, I say go on, right? Discover, I say find out. These are called phrasal verbs. But in academic writing, we have to use the proper word and not the phrasal verb. We have to avoid intensifiers, which also refer to words that are used to give emphasis, and words that indicate quantity, like a bit, a lot of, couple of, sort of, not enough, totally, really, very. All these words have to be avoided, because one reason is academic writing means it should be more towards the factual side. We must be clear. Usually when somebody says a bit, a sort of, it shows that the person is not very clear, which is not accepted in academic writing. So that is why we have to avoid such words in academic writing. Then informal transition. Transition means moving from one idea to another or one sentence to another. We begin those sentences with in an informal way with so, anyway, but, also, plus, well, to sum up, all right. All these things are to be avoided in academic writing. We must avoid first person and second person point of view in academic writing. This is very important, and which is often found in many written formal matter, like subject. Sometimes we use I, me, us, we, you, your, and all these have to be avoided. Now, what we have to use in place of all these things, we'll see in a later slide. Next, we have to avoid run-on expressions. Run-on means we like to show that the list is continuing, going on, etc., so on, so forth. All these things are to be avoided. We have to be very clear. Whatever information is there, we have to give. We must not say etc. So when that the reader is confused, reader is curious to know what it means, right? And sometimes etc. also, when you use etc. in formal writing, it also points that. Points to the fact that you are yourself not clear about what all things are included in the list. So it has to be avoided. We have to avoid unsophisticated and too simple expressions. So already we discussed the importance of vocabulary. So that is why we can refer to that academic vocabulary list and find substitutes for such simple words like bad, good, big, nice, cheap, right, wrong, etc. We must avoid the words that indicate absolute quantities like all, every, etc. Superlatives like best, worst, most, always, never. We must not use expressions found in letters like best, hi, cheers, love, best wishes, best regards, yours affectionately, yours truly, etc. Abbreviations are to be avoided like ASAP, OK, net, TV, net for internet, cell for cell phone, etc. Slang expressions like dude, cool guy, Cool, guy, kidding, cop, bugger, buck, snob, chap, lad, lass, loo, rubbish, okay, okay, weird. Cliched expressions. Cliched means which have been used so often that people get bored of it. Like last but not the least, time will tell, in a jiffy, brave as a lion, fit as a fiddle, etc. Highly subjective expressions like beautiful, ugly, wonderful, horrible, good, which are more or less like adjectives, which because why this is so is because academic writing means it has to be as objective as possible, impersonal. But when we use adjectives, it usually denotes your impression about the noun, right? So that has to be avoided. Then vague, that is unclear and impolite expressions, disrespectful expressions, like you use in casual conversation, things, stuff, sort of, kind of, all those words have to be avoided. We must avoid ethnic slur. Slur means terms which are used to insult people, or racist expressions like nigger, paki, abcd. You're very much familiar with ABCD, I guess, after the film American Born Confused Daisy. Colored, Eskimo, Yankee, Madrasi, Gypsy, all these to be avoided in formal academic writing. Then discriminatory words associated with physical and mental disability like handicapped, crippled, autistic, deaf, and dumb. Other word categories to be avoided in academic writing include three categories of called qualifiers, absolutes, and adjectives. Qualifiers means words and phrases used for expressing doubt. Such words, we are not saying that they have to be avoided completely, but they have to be used with care. Very, very only if they are really necessary, we must use such words. Examples for qualifiers or words that express doubt include appears, seems, indicates, suggests, may, might, could, etc. So the whole list is given there. All these words, as we know, express doubt. So as we are talking about academic writing, we know that it is desirable that the writer is clear and sure about whatever he's writing. So that is why qualifiers are not really accepted in academic writing as far as possible. Then the second, because they reduce the strength of claims and conclusions. That's another reason. But they are sometimes acceptable in subjects that come under humanity. So mostly we find even if qualifiers are used, they are used in humanities subjects, under humanities, because there we have we cannot be absolute always, we cannot say for sure everything, that is not acceptable, whereas in science you have to be very sure, but in humanities if you're sure, that becomes unacceptable. You How can you be sure? It is always questioned. So in humanities, absolutes are not. So it depends on the discipline you are writing in. So since this is a review that you are writing, you can use qualifiers. As and when they are needed. Not too many qualifiers. You must select the apt qualifier and use it wherever it is needed. But you should not use absolute because it's a film review that you're looking at. It is under humanity. It is quite subjective. It is not objective. So you cannot use absolutes like will, am, is. This will bring a change. Like that, I cannot say. If I'm writing about a film, this film will bring a change, I cannot use an absolute there. I can only say this film might, appears to, seems to, like that. Okay, so it depends which words categories to be avoided in academic writing, also depends on the discipline in which you are writing. If it is a science, you have to avoid qualifier and you have to use more of absolute. If it is humanities, you have to avoid absolutes and use qualifier with care. But as far as qualifiers are concerned, the problem is this: they make writing wordy. That is why it is maybe used in humanities, because humanities prefers wordy. Wordy means, very beautiful language. You explain something in using more and more of words. You use a lot of words. Scientific things, of it's just fact which might be explained in just one sentence. But in humanities, we use a lot of sentence to convey our idea, but that is also not always acceptable, especially in academic writing. And then the other category is adjectives, which we've already seen, and words also, like basically, essentially, mostly, slightly, somewhat, and virtually. In 5.4 we have already seen words to be avoided. Now in 5.5 we've been given a list of words that can be used instead of the words that are avoided. So let's look at those samples or alternative expressions which can be used. Instead of contracted form like don't, won't, shouldn't, etc., we must use the full words that like do not, will not, should not, etc. Instead of personal pronouns like I, etc., we must rephrase the sentence. Like for example, here in this essay, I have argued that. So instead of using I, you can just remove the subject I, the pronoun there, and you can say in this essay, it is argued that. Who is arguing? We are not stating very clearly. And instead of using we, from the evidence we can perceive some visible changes in the functioning of special schools, we can rephrase it to from the evidence some visible changes can be noted. So we are just changing the voice there, okay, from active to passive, so that we can avoid the use of such pronouns. Then in order to avoid phrasal verbs, instead of phrasal verbs we use their substitutes, the actual words. Like instead of go on, I use continue. Instead of put off, we use postpone, etc. And instead of colloquial expressions, we go for formal alternatives. uh, so like sooner or later, get out of hand, beyond doubt. Instead of beyond doubt, we can use a formal alternative like definitely, right? Then instead of run on expressions like etc., we must have to avoid that and add and before the last word in the list, and complete it. So I won't say cricket, football, volleyball, etc. Instead, I would say cricket, football, and volleyball. So hope you will also make these changes in the review that you have written. If you have used any of the contracted forms, you have to change it into full words. We have already said that. If you have used any pronouns, you have to change that. And phrasal verbs, colloquial expressions, etc. All these you have to change in your review if you have used them. Also, another example you have where you have used and so on. Essays, reports, dissertations, case studies, and so on. Instead of that, before case studies, we add and. Dissertations and case studies. Run-on expressions are not needed. Informal expressions, a lot, a bit. Instead of that, like in the example, the controller of examinations found it a bit difficult. So that you can say controller of examinations found it difficult. How much difficult, we don't have to specify. Then redundant or repetitive, unnecessary expressions like absolutely essential. We know that if it's essential means it's absolute. Still remains. Remains means it's there still. That it's both the words have the same meaning. Actual facts. Facts are always actual. So why should we use both the words? Advance warning. Warning is all. Warning itself means it is given beforehand. So advance is not needed. So all those words we remove whatever is not needed and we use only one word there. Okay, and vague expressions, things, stuff. Instead of that, like passenger fix their eyes on their stuff. That's very common language colloquial expression. Stuff here refers to luggage, so we have to use a proper word there in formal communication. Then we have sent words to be avoided. The list includes superlative expressions or intensifiers, which are used for exaggerating, perfect, best, worst. All these actually makes it more subjective, right? So we have to tone down. We must not use that much of exaggeration. We must reduce it. Tone down means reduce its effect by using words like accomplished, experienced, ideal, perfect. Instead of that, you can say ideal. Never. Instead of that, you can maybe use words like rarely. So it has to be toned down. We should not use extreme. We should not go to extreme levels. So the team contained a perfect combination of players. Who are we to decide that it is perfect? Instead, we can say what we mean is team contained a combination of experienced players. So that would be true, of course, right? Perfect would be we can only decide in comparison to other teams. So it would not be always true. Then subjective expressions, denoting our feelings like beautiful, all those adjectives have to be avoided, and you have to be very specific, like use words like vividly, which means clearly, and all those things. Then again we mentioned unacceptable sentences like derogatory sentences, insults, racist comments have to be avoided, and you have to refer to whichever country they belong to, African, Pakistan, Asian American, or whatever it is. And expressions that denote gender like fireman, so chairman, freshman, where the gender is made clear. Instead of that, you can use words which are gender neutral, like firefighter, chairperson, first year, pilot, all those things.